Hello everybody. Today we are starting a series that I've wanted to really start since the beginning of the channel. This is the History of the Crusades by Joseph F. Michaud. This is something I wanted to address. I'm learning French, but I'm not very good at it, so there's a few things that if you hear me pronounce them, they might not be right. I'm trying. The flavor of this book is very French. The terms, the names are not anglicized, and I'm going to try and keep them that way and respect that. I guess I just want to go into my intent a little bit. My intent is to make a good production of this book in particular, which I felt was a really great introduction to the period for me. I think there are some really praiseworthy things about, characters in this narrative. St. Louis IX is a very heroic character, somebody who I aspire to be like in a lot of ways. I think there are all kinds of characters like that in here. The Catholics among you, and those of you who are Orthodox, obviously have some interest in sort of tracing the papacy or the conflicts between Catholic and Orthodox people. I think this can help you a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of people online politely LARPing, and this is my LARPing antidote. I want to get the good and the bad of this period in full color. I want to say the purpose of the series is not to glorify violence. It is not to, stoke ethnic or religious hatred or anything of that kind. I think you'll find even that we as Christians obviously have our side here, but I think there's some admirable characters even on the other. So, just enter this with an open mind regardless of some of your biases and where you're coming from. And please do not take away from this series that you should start Crusade LARPing, or especially not that, it's time to be violent or something. Enjoy the book. Thank you. The History of the Crusades, Book 1. From the earliest ages of the Church, a custom had been practiced of making pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Judea, full of religious remembrances, was still the promised land of the faithful. The blessings of heaven appeared to be in store for those who visited Calvary, the tomb of Jesus Christ, and renewed their baptism in the waters of the Jordan. Under the reign of Constantine, the ardor for pilgrimages increased among the faithful. They flocked from all the provinces of the empire to worship Jesus Christ upon his own tomb, and to trace the steps of their God in that city which had but just resumed its name, and which the piety of an emperor had caused to issue from its ruins. The Holy Sepulchre presented itself to the eyes of the pilgrims. Surrounded by a magnificence which redoubled their veneration, an obscure cavern had become a marble temple, paved with precious stones and decorated with splendid colonnades. To the east of the Holy Sepulchre appeared the Church of the Resurrection, in which they could admire the riches of Asia, mingled with the arts of Greece and Rome. Constantine celebrated the 31st year of his reign by the inauguration of this church, and thousands of Christians came, on occasion of the solemnity, to listen to the panegyry of Christ from the lips of the learned and holy Bishop Eusebius. St. Helena, the mother of the emperor, repaired to Jerusalem at a very advanced age, and caused churches and chapels to be built upon Mount Tabor, in the city of Nazareth, and in the greater part of the places which Christ had sanctified by his presence and his miracles. From this period, pilgrimages to the Holy Land became much more frequent. The pilgrims, no longer in dread of the persecution of the pagans, could now give themselves up, without fear, to the fervor of their devotion. The Roman eagles, ornamented with the cross of Jesus Christ, protected them on their march. They everywhere trampled underfoot the fragments of idols, and they traveled amidst the abodes of their fellow Christians. When the Emperor Julian, in order to weaken the authority of the prophecies, undertook to rebuild the temple of the Jews, numerous were the prodigies related by which God confounded his designs, and Jerusalem, for that attempt even, became more dear to the disciples of Jesus Christ. The Christians did not cease to visit Palestine. St. Jerome, who towards the end of the 4th century had retired to Bethlehem, informs us in one of his letters that pilgrims arrived in crowds in Judea, and that around the Holy Tomb the praises of the Son of God were to be heard, uttered in many languages. From this period, pilgrimages to the Holy Land were so numerous that several doctors and fathers of the Church thought it their duty to point out the abuses and danger of the practice. They told Christians that long voyages might turn them aside from the path of salvation, that their God was not confined to one city, that Jesus Christ was everywhere where faith and good works were to be found. But such was the blind zeal which then drew the Christians toward Jerusalem, that the voice of the holy doctors was scarcely heard. The councils of enlightened piety were not able to abate the ardor of the pilgrims, who believed they should be wanting in faith and zeal, if they did not adore Jesus Christ in the very places where, according to the expression of St. Jerome, the light of the gospel first shone from the top of the Holy Cross. As soon as the people of the West became converted to Christianity, they turned their eyes to the East. From the depths of Gaul, from the forests of Germany, from all the countries of Europe, New Christians were to be seen hastening to visit the cradle of the faith they had embraced. An itinerary for the use of pilgrims served them as a guide from the banks of the Rhone and the Dordogne to the shores of the Jordan, and conducted them, on their return, from Jerusalem to the principal cities of Italy. When the world was ravaged by the Goths, the Huns, and the Vandals, the pilgrimages to the Holy Land were not at all interrupted. Pious travelers were protected by the hospitable virtues of the barbarians, who began to respect the cross of Christ, and sometimes even followed pilgrims to Jerusalem. In these times of trouble and desolation, a poor pilgrim, who bore his scrip and staff, often passed through fields of carnage, and traveled without fear amidst armies, which threatened the empires of the East and the West. Illustrious families of Rome came to seek an asylum at Jerusalem, and upon the tomb of Jesus Christ. Christians then found, on the banks of the Jordan, that peace which seemed to be banished from the rest of the world. This peace, which lasted several centuries, was not troubled before the reign of Heraclius. Under this reign, the armies of Khosrow, king of Persia, invaded Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. The holy city fell into the hands of the worshippers of fire. The conquerors bore away into captivity vast numbers of Christians, and profaned the churches of Jesus Christ. All the faithful deplored the misfortunes of Jerusalem, and shed tears when they learned that the king of Persia had carried off, among the spoils of the vanquished, the cross of the Savior, which had been preserved in the church of the resurrection. Heaven, at length, touched by the prayers and afflictions of the Christians, blessed the arms of Heraclius, who after 10 years of reverses, triumphed over the enemies of Christianity and the empire, and brought back to Jerusalem the Christians whose chains he had broken. Then was to be seen an emperor of the East, walking barefooted in the streets of the holy city, carrying on his shoulders, to the summit of Calvary, the wood of the true cross, which he considered the most glorious trophy of his victories. This imposing ceremony was a festival for the people of Jerusalem and the Christian Church, which, latter still, every year celebrates the memory of it. When Heraclius re-entered Constantinople, he was received as the liberator of the Christians, and the kings of the West sent ambassadors to congratulate him. But the joy of the faithful was not of long duration. Towards the beginning of the 7th century, there had arisen, in an obscure corner of Asia, a new religion, opposed to all others, which preached dominion and war. Muhammad had promised the conquest of the world to his disciples, who had issued almost naked from the deserts of Arabia. By his passionate doctrine he was able to inflame the imagination of the Arabs, and on the field of battle knew how to inspire them with his own impetuous courage. His first successes, which must have greatly exceeded his hopes, were like so many miracles, increasing the confidence of his partisans and carrying conviction to the minds of the weak and wavering. The political state of the East seemed to offer no obstacle to the progress of a sect which, from its birth, showed itself everywhere with fire and sword. The worship of the Magi was sinking into contempt. The Jews, scattered throughout Asia, were opposed to the Sabaeans and divided amongst themselves, and the Christians, under the names of Eutychians, Nestorians, Maronites, and Jacobites, were engaged in heaping, reciprocally, anathemas upon one another. The empire of Persia, torn by intestine wars and attacked by the barbarous races of Tyre, had lost both its power and splendor. That of the Greeks, weakened both within and without, was hastening to its fall. Everything was perishing in the East, says Bossuet. A new religion, a new empire, sprang up easily in the midst of ruins. The armed doctrine of Muhammad invaded, within a very short period, the 3 Arabias, a part of Syria, and a large division of Persia. After the death of the prophet of Mecca, his lieutenants and the companions of his first exploits carried on his great work. The sight of conquered provinces only increased the fanaticism and the bravery of the Saracens. They had no fear of death in the field of battle, for, according to the words of their prophet, paradise, with all its voluptuous pleasures, awaited those who precipitated themselves upon the enemy, and behind them hell opened its abysses. Their conquests were so much the more rapid, from their uniting in their military and religious government, the prompt decision of despotism, with all the passions that are met within a republic. Masters of Persia and Syria, they soon took possession of Egypt. Their victorious battalions flowed on into Africa, planted the standard of the prophet upon the ruins of Carthage, and carried the terror of their arms to the shores of the Atlantic. From India to the Straits of Cadiz, and from the Caspian Sea to the ocean, language, manners, religion, everything was changed. What had remained of paganism was annihilated, together with the worship of the Magi. Christianity scarcely subsisted, and Europe itself was threatened with a similar destruction. Constantinople, which was the bulwark of the West, saw before its walls innumerable hordes of Saracens. Several times besieged, both by sea and land, the city of Constantine only owed its safety to the Greek fire, to the assistance of the Bulgarians, and to the inexperience of the Arabs in the art of navigation. During the first age of the Hegira, The conquest of the Mussulmans was only bounded by the sea which separated them from Europe, but when they had constructed vessels, no nation was safe from their invasion. They ravaged the isles of the Mediterranean, the coasts of Italy, and Greece. Fortune or treason made them masters of Spain, where they overturned the monarchy of the Goths. They took advantage of the weakness of the children of Clovis to penetrate into the southern provinces of Gaul, and were only stopped in their invasions by the victories of Charles Martel. Amidst the first conquests of the Saracens, they had turned their eyes towards Jerusalem. According to the faith of the Mussulmans, Muhammad had been in the city of David and Solomon. It was from Jerusalem that he set out to ascend into heaven in his nocturnal voyage. The Saracens considered Jerusalem as the house of God, as the city of saints and miracles. A short time after the death of the prophet, the soldiers of Omar besieged it. The Christians, animated by despair, swore to defend the city. The siege lasted 4 months, each day being marked by sorties or attacks. The Saracens approaching the walls, repeating the words of the Quran, "Let us enter into the Holy Land which God has promised us." After enduring all the miseries of a long siege, the inhabitants of Jerusalem at length surrendered to the Caliph Omar, who himself came into Palestine to receive the keys and the submission of the conquered city. The Christians had the grief of seeing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre profaned by the presence of the chief of the infidels. The patriarch Sophronius, who accompanied the Caliph, could not refrain from repeating the words of Daniel, "The abomination of desolation is in the holy place." Jerusalem was filled with mourning. A gloomy silence reigned in the churches, and in all the places in which the hymns of the Christians had so long resounded.